I had very little in basic training. I later on became a rangefinder. So there's not much to it. I learned the ordinary drills that a soldier learns. I learned how to use a pick by numbers. A pick by numbers, lift, strike, rake and break. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I can use a pick. I had been no stranger to a pick and no stranger to a shovel, but I was certainly strange to the ways of the army. But I enjoyed my army life. I'd put my hand up to join. I have no regrets. It's all in the moment. It was a most extraordinary experience for a person who had always lived in the outback. I was in the most impressive convoy of some of the world's largest liners, Queen Mary, Queen Elizabeth, I think. I've forgotten their names now. But I went to the Middle East, landed at Suez, and made my way up to Palestine. And there I did undergo some training there. But after some life in Palestine, without a bath, I learned the ways of a soldier, and I found good friends, and I still retain the friendship of those people, their widows, their sons and their daughters and their families to this day. For some couple of days, we were stationed on a bridge called the Bridge of Jacob's Seven Daughters over the Jordan River between the Sea of Galilee and Lake Hula. We arrived at that station in the middle of the night and took up gun positions on a very, very dark night. In the machine gun business, you try to avoid having a blast from the front of the gun, and so you try to clear the front area of the gun so that you don't draw attention to yourself by creating a swirl of dust. We found in the morning that we were in a cemetery and our machine gun placement was over a grave, but we didn't fire a shot. That was a new experience for us, of course. There was a range of hills outside Damascus, a mile or so, and a large number of troops were stationed there, and they were mainly African troops. And we were told that there was a trench surrounding that portion of Damascus down the road, about a mile and a half away. And our truck with our crew, gun crew, that would have been the driver, would have been 5 or 6 of us altogether, were told to go down this open road and see if the trench was occupied. So we went down the road and nothing happened. And the trench wasn't occupied. But in the meantime, I had had my Damascus moment because I didn't know what was going to happen. Well, nothing did. And when the troops behind that range of hills knew that everything was okay, they came swarming down towards Damascus. There's a lot of shooting that night in which we were not involved. And the very next morning, Damascus surrendered. We had, before arriving at Batavia, the day after Singapore fell, I believe we arrived on the 16th of February, where Singapore fell on the 15th. We had come through the Sunda Straits at night time, and I felt that the Orkneys was putting out a little bit of an extra spurt to get through there, because it was a pretty tight place to be held up in. That was the site of the Battle of Sunda Straits later on, when the Australian cruiser Perth and a number of other ships were sunk when they intercepted the Japanese invasion force invading Java. So let us say, the surrender that controlled my affairs happened on the 8th of March, not on the 15th of February. And that was the day when the entire Dutch East Indies was surrendered to the Japanese. And I became a prisoner of war, together with most of my battalion and another Australian battalion, the 2nd Pioneers, Colonel Dunlop's 2nd Casualty Clearing Station. And between those three people, we became the principal defenders of Java. And we were actively engaging with the Japanese and lost quite a number of troops on Java prior to March the 8th, when the surrender was called. And we were called upon to put down our arms. Not a very honourable day. Well, the very first step, of course, is the acknowledgement that we were prisoners of war. A very, very hollow feeling. It had more than an ordinary effect on me, because I had previously, as I mentioned, been to the Middle East. And when I had arrived in the Middle East and transported up through Palestine to the camp, Hill 89, I believe, I passed compounds of German and Italian prisoners of war. And I held them in contempt, because I was a young soldier. I was 19, I suppose. And I just felt contempt for them, because I hadn't fired a shot, but I was on top of the world and looking to conquer the world. And I was completely dismissive of these soldiers. It was only a few months after that that I was involved in the war in Syria, which we won. So I was riding high with a sense of victory. But very early in the next year, on the 8th of March, I became a prisoner of war, and I felt the humiliation of defeat. Following the humiliation of defeat, of course, was the contempt in which the enemy held me, which was similar to the way I had felt about the German and Italian prisoners of war. So it was a payoff, wasn't it? It was a payoff that stung for 3.5 years. And I learned what humiliation was. And perhaps I learned a lesson or two, which did me no harm. The day I arrived, I'll call it Konyu, because that's where I did arrive. And that was the starting place on the railway. I was on a Japanese truck. I had come from Java to Singapore, from Singapore to Ban Pong, and from Ban Pong, that was on a train, I got into some Japanese trucks. Actually, they were Allied trucks. They were, what did we call them? What sort of wagons were they? They were trucks. Standing up. I had a banana that day, and that night we arrived at a place called Taso, which was on the Kwanoi River. And we had our first experience at how primitive the sanitation was going to be. The next day, still on our trucks, I arrived at Connew. We were on the spine of a range of hills, and we got off our trucks and descended a very, very steep descent. I later on found out that it was 500 or 600 feet of descent. It was very, very hilly country. And I did not know on that day that sometime later that year, this was in January of 1943, sometime later that year, the path I took down that very steep hill was going to be traversed by a railway line. I had no idea that would happen, but it did. And that sting of humility has been lessened to a very great extent by the fact that in 2015 I became a guest of the Japanese government, where with a number of other former prisoners of war I visited Japan. And I was conducted on a tour of Japan by a number of Japanese ladies, not men, Japanese ladies. They were the models of decorum, modesty, generosity, and grace. And it was just wonderful to visit a place I had previously beheld prisoner in the company of these people. So 75 years can make a big difference. And that's how it stands today.